Since 1785, the Times has been essential reading.
Now, it's essential listening.
Times Radio chooses conversation over confrontation.
Covers Westminster and beyond.
Ask the right questions.
To keep you well informed.
We give words space and let the stories do the talking.
Listen on DAB radio, online, on your smart speaker or via our app.
Good afternoon. Hello. That was quite the welcome. Not for me, I think. My name is Tom Whipple. I'm the science editor at The Times. I remember back in 2016, I interviewed someone from one of those sort of worthy academic institutions that are always wanting more money. It was called the Jenner Institution in Oxford. And he told me that they were developing some great vaccines, and that we really should be investing in them. But he didn't think it would happen, because what's the business case? Who cares about vaccines for diseases that happen in other countries? And I left it thinking, well, that was fascinating science, but perhaps sort of at the worthy but dull end, and how would I get a story about it? Well, everyone does stories about vaccines now, and I am with two people, members of, well, Sarah is a member of the Jenner Institute, but definitely not worthy but dull. Sarah and Kath Green, they have written a book about their year being part of the team that has brought this vaccine to the world. I'm going to ask them a few questions. I'd love it if you ask questions, which will come through on my iPad, and hopefully at the end of it, lots of you will go and sign their book, or they will sign their book, and lots of you will go and buy their book. But look, thank you very much for coming here and talking. Just to give us an idea, in January 2020, what was each of you doing? What are your day jobs, and what were you up to? Sarah, then Kath.
So normally, I'm working on the development of vaccines that for viruses we already know about, that do cause outbreaks, but we don't have any vaccines against them, and the work is quite slow. We're always trying to raise funding to keep things moving, and we know we need to be very efficient in our use of the funds, and that's why we use a technology to make vaccines that we can use to make many different vaccines without having to go right back to the beginning each time.
And what about you, Kath?
So I have two jobs at the University of Oxford. I'm a research scientist, and my historical primary interest has been cancer genetics and how mutations that you acquire during your lifetime impact on your likelihood of getting cancer in your lifetime. But over the last 3 years, I've also headed quite an interesting facility within the University of Oxford, which is a medicines manufacturing facility. It's called the Clinical BioManufacturing Facility, but we call it the CBF. And as my role there is to manufacture innovative medicines which are invented by the academics at the university. Sarah is one of those. She and I have worked together on projects for some of these vaccines against potential outbreak pathogens. And so in early 2020, when she looked around for somebody to help her with this project, I was just down the road.
Okay, and so when you looked around for someone to help you with this project, what did you think this project was? What did you think your year was going to constitute when you presumably heard about this new pneumonic virus?
Well, in the early days of January 2020, it was a question of keeping an eye on what was happening as the number of cases increased and what was known about it. We needed to know, was it a pathogen that had been identified previously? was it something new? It turned out it was something new. The next question, well, is there really human-to-human transmission? Because sometimes you can have, and this happened with avian flu, you can have a lot of people being infected from the same source, but the virus doesn't really transfer from one person to another very well. So it looked like that was the case. It was becoming more and more certain. Then we got definite proof there was human-to-human transmission. Now, if there isn't, you don't need a vaccine. You just need to identify the source and keep people away from it. Once there's human-to-human transmission, that means it's going to spread, so you want to be able to start to prevent that by using a vaccine. And by the time we got the sequence of the virus on the 11th of January, with a small number of colleagues, we decided to start working on this, but not knowing how far this project would need to go, thinking that it might not ever need cath to manufacture for a clinical trial. We might just do some early work and show that we could make a vaccine, but by that time it wouldn't actually be needed because the outbreak might have been contained. So it was recognising that if we were going to need a vaccine, we had to get on as fast as possible, but on the other hand, it might turn out that this was just an academic project.
And what is your vaccine? Can you describe how the adenovirus thing works and what's sort of special and interesting about it?
Okay, so our vaccine isn't the only one that uses an adenovirus to deliver the vaccine. So adenoviruses are viruses that normally cause either respiratory or gastrointestinal infections. We get them a lot throughout our lifetime. It's a fairly mild infection in most cases. But they're viruses that we can repurpose to make a vaccine. So the first thing we do is we take out one of the genes of the virus that allows it to make more copies of itself in the human body. And then that means that when we use it as a vaccine, it can't spread, it can't actually cause an infection that spreads through the body. So it's very safe to use, even if somebody's immune system isn't going to respond to it. They won't be overtaken by this adenovirus spreading through their body. They don't have to control that. And then what we do is we add in the genetic instructions to make the thing that we want the immune response against. So for the coronavirus, I'm sure everybody's very familiar now, it's the spike protein that coats the surface of the coronavirus. We want a good immune response against that, so we put the genetic information to produce that protein inside our adenovirus. And then what we do is we get cath to manufacture large amounts of it and then purify it. So we've got a very pure preparation of this adenovirus expressing the spike protein gene. That's what's injected into people's arms. And from there, it will go inside muscle cells and start making lots and lots and lots of the spike protein. So there are two signals that the immune system needs to respond. One is to see something that's foreign, that it hasn't encountered before, and recognize that it's different. And then the other thing is a danger signal. So because we're using a virus to deliver the spike protein, there's a very short-lived infection, so we get that danger signal attracting the immune system, saying, come and look at what's going on here. Look, this is new. We haven't seen this before. That's what the immune system needs to make a response against. It's a very short-lived effect. Within days, that's all over. But by that time, the immune system's kicked in and it's making antibodies, it's making a T-cell response, producing immune memory, so that not only do you start to become protected against the virus if you see it in the short term, you've got long-term protection as well.
And when do you get involved? And is this the point at which you realise this isn't just an academic exercise? Is that when cath becomes...
So I think we were talking together even at the point when we were still thinking it might be an academic exercise. So the middle of January, Sarah and Tess have already designed that construct. They've pieced together the spike protein instructions with the adeno instructions, and they've sent that off to be, or we just order that from a company. You basically send a company an email with the string of letters that you need these days. It's super efficient. We talk a lot about how, people ask us a lot, how could you go so fast? I'm digressing. But one of the reasons we can go much faster now is because technology is way better than it was 20 years ago, and we can send an email and they will synthesize us a gene. So that doesn't have to be done by Sarah. That comes then to me. Well, it goes to Sarah, and her team does a little bit of engineering, but even now we've eliminated some of those steps. We could do it better now than we could do it in January 2020 because we've, science progress, isn't it? You've got to build on what you did last year to improve things again. So what needs to happen in order to make the vaccine that's a good enough quality to go into a person? You can't just make that in a regular laboratory at Oxford University. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a science lab in a university. They're not always the most tidy and clean and hygienic places because scientists are a bit scatty and a bit harebrained. But my lab in the University of Oxford is a pristine environment. We have complete control over personnel, over goods that come in, we need certificates of quality to make sure that everything is being ordered and is fully controlled from start to finish, because we're going to make a product that's going to get into a person. To do that, there are 2 stages. You need to make a starting material. So we need to take the strands of DNA that are designed by Sarah, introduce them into the specialised human cells which grow in the laboratory, and make a small first batch. And then from that, we need to expand it to make enough to make a vaccine, also to make enough to send to a large-scale manufacturing firm, so to give to AstraZeneca to then spread around the world. So we make the starting material, which is, our analogy is always for the Guardian readers, I don't know about the Times, but for the Guardian readers, is always like a sourdough starter. So we make that batch of sourdough, and you know when you've got a sourdough, yeah, you can pull a little bit off, and then you can use that to make another, and you can use that, and you can pull a bit off that one, and that's exponential growth, which we obviously also know about now because of coronavirus. So you can use the little bit of what I make, and that then goes on to seed more manufacture, first with me, then with a company in Italy, then with a company in the Netherlands, then with AstraZeneca at now 25 sites around the world. So every batch of AstraZeneca that was ever made came from the very first starting material, sourdough starter, that was made in my very clean and precise team at Oxford.
And can you give an idea of, because this, I spoke to someone at AstraZeneca a while ago who was making it, and they gave this sort of idea of, you know, this one thing that you can hold in your hand that's become 1 billion doses. I mean, at some point this thing travelled to somewhere where...
we shipped it to them. We shipped it to them in, right, so I can do the timeline. So we had the first clone. So I had a microscopic amount of it. It's a virus, yes, so we manufacture it in cells, and you can tell that cells have been infected by the virus because they burst. So the first time we saw the clone, it was looking down a microscope to see where these cells have popped. That was in well D8, it's called D8. Nobody calls it that now, they call it AZD1222 and Vaxxevria and lots of other names depending on Covishield if you're in India. But it all came from that first thing. So I saw it when it was microscopic. Eventually, we made about 300 millilitres, like a can of Coke's worth. And that was then split. Some of that went to AstraZeneca, who then sent it around the world. Some of it we used to make our first batch, and some of it went to Helix and to Advent. So yeah, there was a point where all of that seed stock is in the hands of one of my very talented and steady-handed postdoctoral research scientists. Her name is Kathy, and she's fab. But I don't hold it myself because I'm extremely clumsy, and that would have set us back quite a while in March. I keep well out of that. That is not.
And from that, I mean, looking around, probably 150 people in this room will have had something go into their arm that derived from that
it's
single
insane.
Coke.
Yeah. You don't often, as an academic researcher, get to have the real-world consequences of the work that you do with your colleagues in your arm. But both Sarah and I have AstraZeneca in our arms.
And going back to, things have got serious. I think I spoke to you maybe mid-February, and you were still looking for funding then.
Yeah.
Which was astonishing.
Which went on for a bit.
But you got funding.
We did eventually, yes.
We decided this was a priority after all.
Yes.
And then what happens when you go into lockdown? What are you guys up to? And you know, lockdown was something that we all experienced as a nation, and it was difficult for lots of us in lots of different ways. What's going on in Oxford at the time?
Well, for us, when we went into lockdown, we were in the late stages of manufacture, doing all the tests that have to be carried out on the vaccine after Kath's team have manufactured to make sure it's exactly the right thing, that there's you know, no mistakes in there, we know exactly what the concentration is, all of those things, that it's sterile. Preparation for the clinical trials, lots of discussions with the regulator, the MHRA, about exactly how the clinical trials are going to be run. To accelerate things, they were doing a rolling review of the documentation. So rather than waiting till we got all the information that we need to give them and giving them it in one big data dump, they were taking every piece of information as it was available, reviewing it, and then that was done. And that meant that by the time we got to the very last piece of information coming out of Kath's team, late April, they just had that one last thing to review, so they were able to do it within hours. So we were having discussions with the ethical committee as well, preparing for the clinical trial, but also thinking beyond that, thinking about what do we do about the next phase of manufacture, because Kath's facility is designed to be small and flexible and make lots of different vaccines, but not to make very much of any one of them. So how are we going to move on from there? So we were looking a long way ahead. And I don't think lockdown really affected me all that much because I was just doing the same thing. I was just cycling to my office, spending all day in the office, talking to a computer and then sending lots of emails and then cycling home again.
So yeah, we were the only part of the university that was allowed to still operate. 23rd of March, the country went into lockdown and the university overnight shut. It shut all of its departments. All the undergraduates were either told they have to shelter in place or get the hell out of here. I mean, it was closed down. They closed down the catering, they closed down public transport, the schools were shut. Yeah? So our teams had to make immediate overnight adjustments. First thing we had to do was get permission to be key workers, because it wasn't clear at first, because obviously the government hasn't done this before either. I mean, okay, but so who is a key worker and how do we prove we're a key worker? And are we going to get stopped by the police on the way to work and be able to say, no, we are actually allowed to be going to work today because we've got to go and make a vaccine against COVID unless you let us go to work. But research scientists are not generally key workers, so we needed to get approval from the head of department to get a letter that then we would carry with us to say we're allowed to go to work. It was, as with all of it, figuring it out as we go along. Every day a new challenge, every day more cases, every day we've spent more money and Sarah hasn't found any more money yet. And yeah, another problem came along. It was interesting times, time.
In your book, you describe being approached by several philanthropists saying, how can they help you? And you said, give us food.
Well, no, they decided to do that themselves. That was their idea, which was really great because it wasn't something we would probably have thought of because we were thinking about centrifuges and filters and things like that. But they said they just decided they were going to send our team lunch, which was fantastic. So actually it was lunch and dinner, 7 days a week, because we were working 7 days a week for a very long period of time on end. And the supermarkets were shut. There was no catering on campus. And it was a real problem just trying to find food during the day. And the team was growing, and we were using medical students to come in and help work in the vaccine clinics. You know, they were starting very early, they were there all day, but the fact that they could have a lunch delivered to them and a dinner delivered to them, and they didn't have to go off and find that somewhere, meant that, you know, they felt supported and that we were all better able to do our jobs.
And is it fair to say that despite working on vaccines and things like this for all your life, you'd always anticipated making them for other people? And you hadn't sort of anticipated the situation where you'd be preparing for a pandemic whilst being in a pandemic?
I suppose the view of, so it was emerging pathogen and outbreak pathogens that we were working on previously. That's what they were called. So an outbreak is localised. So the concept had always been that there might be an outbreak somewhere in the world, and us in Oxford in our ivory towers would get all the kit out and we'd make a vaccine and then we'd send it there. But then obviously that's not what happened because we were in the pandemic when we were trying to make it. We'd only ever planned to go fast, but we'd planned to go fast under our normal working circumstances, not having to cope with lockdown and no food. And
yeah, it's strange because it seems obvious now that if we know that we're an interconnected world and we know it only takes one person to get on a plane, we know this, and realistically we knew this 5 years ago, but yeah, exactly. There hadn't been that real drive as a community or as a scientific community or as a political society to think, you know, how should we prepare for this? We know that the government things were done and reports were written, but we never really, gripped it. What's it really going to be like? Nobody had thought about supply chain issues. Nobody had thought about the fact that most of our staff are, a lot of them in vaccinology are female, many of them with children at school. Nobody had ever thought, well, what are we going to do for childcare when somebody's got to work around the clock? And we hadn't thought also about the other issue, which is very close to my heart, is global manufacturing supply chain, which fell over for a bit because everybody needed syringes and glass vials and complicated plastic filters and things that you don't care about that I need to make vaccines. And suddenly everybody in the world has transitioned to making vaccines in a panic. But that means that all the stuff that you need to make vaccines is in really short supply, and they're in countries that don't want to let them go quite often.
Yeah.
It all became very complicated. At some point, we'd manufactured loads of vaccine in Italy, but there were no flights from Italy to London, and the trials running here in Oxford. I was like, well, we need to get the vaccine that we've made and is ready to go to the UK, and we ended up having to charter a private plane to bring 500 doses of vaccine from Rome to London.
Did anyone get to sit on it?
No, just, well, the pilot, presumably. And then like a styrofoam box in the back with the vaccine in and lots of temperature trackers to make sure it's not... I know, we should have gone to Rome for lunch. But Rome was shut, yeah? You can't go to Rome for lunch. Like, Aperol is cancelled. There's no way to do it. But that cost us a lot of money. And we didn't have money. We don't know how much money it cost to charter a private plane. It was like £20,000 or something mad. But by that point, AstraZeneca were on board, and so they were able to underwrite that cost. But one funny story is so obviously at Oxford University, we were at this point trying to raise funds anywhere we could and talking to philanthropists and talking to donors and talking to government agencies and talking to pharma. But we were in some meeting when we'd said we'd already done this. Okay, AstraZeneca have agreed they'll fly the plane, and somebody in our like fundraising office said, "Oh, you should have asked. We know loads of people with jets." Well, we're in the wrong business now. We don't know anybody with a jet. Yeah. So we could apparently have just tapped up somebody with a jet.
Yeah.
And how did you? How and when did you get the deal with AstraZeneca? Because what we've heard is that Oxford was you corporately, and you were insistent this needed to be something that was going to be, for the world and distributed around the world. Was that something that, did you reach the point where you think, well, maybe we'd have to compromise this, if we can't find it? Because you need a pharmaceutical company, don't you?
We absolutely need a pharmaceutical company, and we knew that from years back. This was something that seemed to dawn on other people during 2020, but we'd always known that we had to have a pharma partner who's going to manufacture it and then distribute it. So it was a question of who that was going to be, and those discussions were starting to be held in the first few months of 2020. But we didn't take part in those negotiations, so that was being done by other people in the university. And the Vice-Chancellor was absolutely insistent that this was going to be not-for-profit during the pandemic and for low-income countries in perpetuity, and that's what happened. So we were really busy getting on with getting the vaccine ready for the clinical trials while those discussions were going on.
When the announcement came out, we found out the same day as you did that Oxford has partnered with AstraZeneca. As the terms of the deal came out, I think everybody was happy with that. AZ are not known for being big players in the vaccine market, but they are global players. It was clear they were going to be, able to contribute to this project in ways that we clearly needed. And one thing we've learned from this is that the earlier you ask for help, the better. You can't possibly do everything yourself in these kind of crazy situations, so you need to get people in who know how to do things. But it seemed to us that that deal was the right deal. It's a completely new model to ask a major global pharma company to put huge amounts of investment in and to do that at cost. So they're not making a loss, but they're not making a profit, is the idea. I think naively we thought that would be a game changer at the time, didn't we?
Yeah. But what they also did was they came along and said to us, we're not going to interfere. You clearly, this is up and running. You're doing this. We're going to support. We're going to do what we need to do, but we're not going to interfere. So I think we were a bit concerned that when a pharma partner came on board, they'd just start saying, well, why are you doing that? That's not how you do it.
That's not how you... But they didn't.
But they didn't.
They were hugely supportive. I mean, it was complicated, that building a new relationship with a multi-billion-dollar firm at the same time as trying to run the trials. The meetings were sometimes very complicated because we don't all speak the same language. I mean, we all speak English, but they speak pharma English, and we speak, ivory tower English. It's not the same. But we managed to get a grip of each other's dialects quite quickly. And, I mean, they've been so supportive throughout.
Yep.
Great bunch of scientists and a great bunch of really good humans.
And they work just as hard as we do.
Oh, my God, they work so hard. Yeah. They're calling us all... When we're thinking, what time is it in the US? We're like, oh yeah, those guys are working. Yeah.
And so sort of coming out of, so we're in the spring, and there's the big first wave, and then we're going into the summer. And from your point of view, leaving aside anything else about it, it sort of ended inconveniently soon, didn't it, for the trials? If there had been transmission throughout the summer, you'd have got...
this problem that lockdowns really work.
Yes. So, but it picked up much sooner than anybody expected. So the modelling from February was looking like there was going to be increasing cases that might start to peak in May or June. It turned out that was completely wrong, because I think I read only recently there were 1,000 different introductions of the virus into this country, and it came, there was a lot more of it here in the early months than anybody knew. So that meant that cases increased really fast. we didn't have time to get people vaccinated ahead of the lockdown. And what we really wanted to do was get a cohort of people vaccinated with either our vaccine or a control vaccine, and then they would be exposed to the virus as everybody else was being exposed to the virus in normal life, and we'd be able to find out if the vaccine worked. But because the epidemic took off so quickly in the UK and we had to go into lockdown, we were then had a lot of people who were vaccinated, but we couldn't tell if the vaccine worked because everybody was in lockdown.
And did you ever doubt that it would work? Because, I mean, I was chatting to people then who were saying, look, we have to consider the situation that no vaccine will work. We're doing all of these vaccines in the hope that one will work. And you were just, in that sense, at least for the people buying the vaccines, you were one lottery ticket of many that they thought might come through. But did you doubt it?
No, I didn't doubt that we would have a vaccine. The question was how effective was it going to be? And then maybe how many doses would we need to give? And could we get away with one dose? Are we better off with two? Could we reduce the dose and then get more doses out of the same amount of bulk product? There are vaccines against coronaviruses that are used in livestock, and they're very successful. So there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to produce a vaccine against a coronavirus. And we knew that the technology that we use is a very good technology. We'd used it a lot before. It had been in 12 different clinical trials prior to 2020. So I was confident we would have a vaccine. The question was, how effective would it be?
Okay, then. So late autumn last year, when did you guys find out, and what was it like?
The efficacy results.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, that's always given to us as that one thing. 23rd of November was the press release. But we'd had quite a lot of steps along the way there. You gained that confidence all the time. Really good animal studies, really good looks at the immunology from the phase 1. So the confidence had been building prior to that 23rd, yeah? And the 23rd was just waiting, because these are blinded clinical trials, so we don't know. You have to wait for a certain number of cases across both groups before you decide to uncover whether the cases are spread in the placebo or the vaccinated, yeah? So you knew it was coming, you just didn't know quite when, yeah?
Yeah, we didn't know when, and then we got the impression it was likely to be over a weekend because of the requirement, because AstraZeneca's involved, they have to release any results that might affect their share price immediately. And so if they do that after the market's closed on a Friday, you've actually got 2 days at the weekend just to have a bit of a sanity check before you have to release the data very early on the Monday, which gives you a bit more time than doing it overnight in the week. Still wasn't really enough time to, to look at what we'd got and to share it with the team and try and work out what it all meant, because our efficacy result was a bit more complicated than the Pfizer one that had been announced previously. We had different levels of efficacy in different parts of the trial, and then we were being asked to explain that. We didn't immediately have an explanation for that, but we worked that out later. It's the interval between the doses that really matters. The longer the interval, the better. And that then fed into the decision not to give the 2 doses 4 weeks apart, but to give them 12 weeks apart, because we were able to show that you don't lose any protection if you wait 12 weeks. And then you get a better improvement in protection if you give the second vaccine after 12 weeks rather than after 4. So it turned out to be really useful that we'd done the trials that way, but when we got the first result, it wasn't easy to explain all of it.
Yeah. And so last time I spoke to you, you said you hadn't really had a celebration that day, and you hadn't had a celebration by the time I spoke to you. Have you now had a celebration?
We have had a couple. So we like you've got to celebrate the good things and also mark when things don't go so well, yeah? So last Friday, Andy Pollard, who's the lead, the clinician who ran all the trials, so the numbers of trials now that have happened within the UK and globally looking at how to deploy vaccines in this circumstance are enormous. COV1, COV2, COV3, COV8, COMCOV, FluCOV, combining vaccines, looking at booster doses, etc. So Andy had got together a lot of the clinical teams. So at some point I think we had 18 different UK clinical trial sites. So that's hospitals around the UK, from Hull to Glasgow to Cardiff, Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield, Southampton. We covered all of the UK. So that's enormous amounts of research nurses and clinicians and volunteers coming across the UK. And Andy had invited us all to a black tie dinner at his fancy Oxford College last Friday. people from Brazil were there, people from AstraZeneca were there, to finally get us, because most of us had never met each other, because all of these trials were run remotely.
That still wasn't the whole team. That was kind of the lead clinical people from those UK trial sites. But most of the Oxford team weren't able to go because, you know, the venue's not big enough. So we still haven't had a big party for the whole team.
But we are Men of the Year.
Oh, yeah.
So we did take a few of them to the GQ Awards at table. Because me and Sarah are very good Men of the Year. We really are. And, so we were allowed to take some of the team. We had a table for 10. So we pulled those out of a hat to give a chance for some of the team to come. And oh my God, that is a party.
And presumably, so I think it's safe to say that vaccines are a little bit back more on the scientific agenda. Presumably you have all the funding you need now to solve all of the vaccine problems and all of the diseases that you want to cure.
Yeah, wouldn't that be wonderful? We've actually gone backwards in terms of the work we were doing on development of vaccines for the outbreak pathogens before the pandemic. It's just really slowed right down. Trying to get that moving again is really difficult, and the funding still isn't there to move that on. I mean, we learned in the pandemic that we could do things faster, we could do things better. We want to be applying those lessons, but we still need to get the funding in place to do that. And then we need stockpiles of vaccines against these pathogens we already know about, because how's it going to look if suddenly there's a big Nipah outbreak that starts to spread around the world? And we've known about that for years. We started making a vaccine 5 years ago, but we haven't done it yet. It's not finished.
And could there be one that, I mean, we sort of, certainly before this, we thought of these as sort of chauvinistically as things that happened in other countries. I mean, could there be another one of those that we know about, but that suddenly becomes something that could spread?
Well, absolutely. So I think something everybody's very much aware of now is how, as SARS-CoV-2 has spread through the world, it's mutated, it's evolved, and what's been selected, what we've ended up with, is a Delta variant, which is very, very highly transmissible. So it's a virus that hasn't been in humans before. It gets into humans. It's not the most efficient one at spreading between humans, but give it time, give it enough opportunities to practice, it gets better. And any virus will do that. So the viruses that are normally in bats or mice, but can infect humans, they're not super efficient at doing it. If you give them the opportunity to cause an outbreak and spread between humans and to mutate, and for those more transmissible variants to be selected, the same thing will happen again. So although we think it's Nipah, well, it's not really very transmissible, we can probably contain an outbreak fairly quickly. If we get a Delta variant of Nipah virus, suddenly we've got a highly transmissible virus with a 50% fatality rate.
And is this something that you think we could tackle with vaccines now?
Yes, absolutely. We can make vaccines, we can have stockpiles, we can immunise the healthcare workers in the regions where the outbreaks are most likely to happen, for two reasons. To protect the healthcare workers themselves, and that's really important because we want them to be able to go and do their job and respond to the start of a new outbreak. But if we don't protect them, they get infected, and then it's often healthcare workers that inadvertently spread the outbreak because they go back to their communities or their homes and then they're infected and they spread it. So we have to make sure they're fully protected. And you can do that with really good personal protective equipment, but you do it much better if you have a vaccine.
I'm going to go to questions from the audience now. I have, I think there's 22 on this iPad. I'll try to get through as many as possible and do keep sending them in. There's one of them that I'm going to, it's from someone anonymous. Write your name on if you want your name on it. But this actually relates to something that I was going to ask as well. Because I remember the last time we chatted, you talked about feeling slightly uncomfortable, both for you, about this idea of being role models and this idea of science being about personality. And I sort of, rather than being interested in it because you're interested in science. And I duly wrote this down, and the next thing I saw was you in the paper with the Sarah Gilbert Barbie. And you are heading off tomorrow to meet the Sarah Gilbert penguin at the London Aquarium.
Penguin. The penguin doesn't really care.
Okay. Square these things.
So the Barbie doll was all about, just trying to make sure that girls think about careers in not just what I do, but all aspects of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So it's for that reason. And it wasn't just me. There were 5 other women who'd taken a major role during the pandemic that also had Barbie dolls made in their honour. But I was the only British one. The others were Australian and American. So I probably got more publicity here. But there was actually a whole cohort of us. And it's just trying to make sure that we make sure that girls know that you know, STEM subjects are for them. And in fact, in our field, more than half of our colleagues are female. It's not really an issue for us, but it is in other parts of engineering and technology. So it's about making sure that, you know, right from an early age, girls don't switch off to these subjects and think that it's not for them. But in general, I don't have role models. I'm not interested in science celebrities. I couldn't name any. I do this work because it's the science that fascinates me, and the ability to learn something and then use that for good. That's what really motivates me.
Yeah, and of course we did this silly thing like write a book. So that does bring attention to ourselves, but that really wasn't our intention. The intention in writing the book was to tell the story in a long form, hopefully in an accessible way, just to do that, to make other people available to see what the science was and how it was done, no matter whether they're scientists or not, because people that read the book will hopefully also grow up to be politicians and social scientists and journalists, and it was just to try and put all of the nuance and complexity and complicatedness, which I know is not a word, but I'm a scientist, so I don't have to worry about what words are what, to kind of get that out there. And it did have this weird side effect of making us be in the spotlight a bit, which, although we do this a bit now, so we're not quite comfortable with it. It's really odd. I mean, you're all lovely, but it's really odd sitting here. And so we're trying to have a bit of fun, also to show that we're ordinary. There's something about us just being Sarah and Kath, that there's nothing special about us.
Public understanding of science is really important because, I mean, the two things we kept hearing about the vaccine was we don't know what's in it and it was made too fast, so don't trust it. And so that's why we wrote the book, because we explain those things. It's not something you can do in a 10-minute news interview. It takes longer. So we explain why it was so quick, and we explain exactly what's in it and how Kath made it, right from the very beginning, all the steps it went through. And all the clinical trials and all the care. And in fact, it doesn't. We had to cut it because it's not all that interesting. But there are so many regulatory steps that we have to go through to make sure that everything is as it should be. That, you know, the enormous amount of care that's taken before even the first person gets immunised.
So we're not here to be famous. We're here to answer questions. We say by having spoke 5 minutes on that one question, so that there's now no more question.
Okay. Well, look, we've got two here that are fairly similar. One anonymous and one by someone who's called themselves Tired of Twitter. So Tired of Twitter says, how do you think we can combat online misinformation? And Anonymous asks, well, what are your views of people who think that COVID-19 is a hoax?
So people who think that COVID-19 is a hoax are unfortunately misinformed. That's just the reality. They're misinformed. We have 150,000 people dead in this country from COVID-19 over the last 18 months, more than 700,000 now in the US, and globally, I mean, millions. So it's just not reasonable to say that's a hoax. It's not possible that all of the... Have you seen Oxford University? We are the least organised organisation in the world. The idea that you could get everybody at Oxford University and all the mainstream media and the BBC and the Times to all cooperate in this global hoax, I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. It's just not true. Sorry, but it's not true. So they are misinformed. I'm not saying that they're evil people. They're just misinformed.
But there tends to be a divide, which is what we're trying to counter by writing the book and doing events like this, in between the people who know something about science, and we'll read a bit about it in the newspapers, and the people who just get all their information from social media. And unfortunately, if there are people who are just getting their information from social media and from their friends, that's where this misinformation can spread, and nobody counters it.
Because people that shout the loudest aren't always the people that have the best information. And we were talking about this at Google the other day. Like, how do we as a community deal with that? It's very difficult because you do need to be able to have access to all sources of information. But if some of them are obviously wrong, but I don't have the answer to that at all, because who gets to decide what's wrong, even though I would say these things are wrong? I don't know. That's not a good answer.
No, it is. And I think it possibly slightly sort of leads us into the next one, which is someone's asked, how did the pressure to produce the vaccine, but I guess to deal with things like this and all the political things, how did it impact on emotions in the team? I mean, how big's your team, who's in it, and how did you sort of get through this year?
Well, the team just kept growing and being added to, and people volunteered, and we drafted in other people. So, and because we were all sitting in our own offices in our own little boxes and we couldn't meet, I still don't know most of the people in the team. I'll know their names, but I won't know their faces, because when I do see them, they've got a mask on. And we're kind of subdivided into different people doing different groups, and everybody with the shared goal. That was a really important thing. We were all trying to do the same thing, and we knew what it was. We were trying to get this vaccine manufactured and into trials and tested and licensed and used. And so everybody worked phenomenally hard to do that. And we didn't have people pulling in different directions and saying, oh, well, I think we should do it in this country and I think we should do something else. Everybody just got behind it and worked really hard together. And it was really, really hard, because people were working 18 hours a day, many, many days of the week, and it just didn't stop. But everybody was doing it together. We were all in it together. And that's why something like philanthropists sending us lunch made such a huge difference, because it affected our ability to do our job better, and it meant that somebody out there cared.
Yeah.
What were you doing for sustenance before then?
Mini cheddars and bounty bars from the vending machine at the Wellcome Centre for Human Genetics. You guys were the same. First of all, but then after the first week, obviously the vending machines were all finished. So then we had to call the university, can you restock the vending machines? And they did that. But then we ran out of, so you know, vending machines, you've got to put coins in them, but you can't go to the shops, so you're not spending any money, so you've soon got no coins left. So the vending machines are full, and you can stare at the bounty bars and the mini cheddars, but you can't get them. So yeah, the sandwich crew, when they turned up, and the chicken salads were lifesavers. That's one to put on the list, isn't it, of things to remember for next time when we plan for a pandemic. It's no good just saying, yeah, the vaccine manufacturers can be key workers, that there has to be all of that support structure around us for public transport and for making sure that the shelves remain stocked and that somehow some kind of childcare arrangements can go. We have to learn from that.
And how did that work? Because your kids are quite old, but yours aren't.
I have one daughter, she's 10. Yeah, so once I got the key worker letter, she was allowed to go to key worker school, but that made us very nervous, particularly in the first wave, because obviously if all of my team are essential, the last thing you want to do is somebody to catch COVID and bring it into the team. And then if some of our kids are at school, they're going to be with all of the other kids that are the healthcare workers' children. And if anybody's going to be transmitting COVID-19 at the beginning of the pandemic of the first wave, it's likely to be healthcare workers, or actually it turns out not the healthcare workers on the front line, but it's often janitors and other people who are in the hospitals who don't get the good PPE. All of this stuff has to be factored in. It's non-trivial to set up a system that's capable of responding to the next disease Y or outbreak pathogen, whichever that's going to be.
So at the moment, I think 30 million people have had the AstraZeneca in the UK. It's something like that. But it looks like we're now moving on to the mRNA vaccines. Is its time? Has it done its job? Is its time done? Have we?
No. So around the rest of the world, there's massive demand for it. So 1.3 billion doses have been released now. In fact, I think I heard on Friday 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
1.5, because targeting 2 billion by the end of the year. So in this country, we stopped using it in people under the age of 40 because of this very rare but serious adverse event of thrombosis with thrombocytopenia, the blood clots. And that was happening more in younger people. That's, as with other rare adverse events after vaccinations, that's not distributed to all populations across the world, and it doesn't happen in the global south, and there's a lot of data being collected on that now. And it's a vaccine that is much easier to transport because it only requires refrigeration, not frozen storage, so that means it feeds into all the existing supply systems, transport chains that already exist for other vaccines. It's much easier to use in other countries. So much of Africa is waiting for this vaccine. It's widely used in India because a lot of it's manufactured in India at Serum Institute of India, but a lot more is needed.
Have you got to the bottom of what the mechanism for that, for the clotting is? And is it fundamental to the platform, or is it?
We haven't got to the bottom of it. So something similar happened with the 2009 flu vaccine, causing narcolepsy in small numbers of mainly teenagers in Northern Europe, and that turned out to be a problem isolated to Northern Europe. And more than 10 years later, it's still not completely known. We know part of the answer to that is to do with a particular gene that's more common in Northern European populations, but that's not the whole answer. So it takes quite a time to untangle these things, and the fact that it's very rare makes it more difficult to do.
Yeah. We have a question from Martin, who's asking, what were the issues that arose during the development of the vaccine that surprised you the most? What are the things that you just hadn't anticipated?
Well, I think, there's a positive and a negative. We talked a bit about the society issues. For me, the positive was the ability, as soon as you've got a big pharma company on board, the ability to think immediately through to where we will be in 6 months' time and 1 billion doses. In some of our very first meetings with AstraZeneca, when we had no evidence that this actual vaccine would work in people, we actually had probably only just vaccinated the first 20 volunteers in the first clinical trial. And we had a meeting with them where they were already sketching out the pathway to manufacturing on all 6 inhabited continents and to 1 billion doses. So that step change of taking what was an academic project run out of our make, do and mend, really small scale thinking about the creative science bit, to being able to go, well, in 6 months' time, we'll be delivering 1 billion doses. That's an extraordinary human endeavour story and achievement. And full credit has to go to AZ for enabling that, because I don't think we would have thought it would be possible to go that fast with manufacturing. It was transformative for me and something that we can take forward. If we can do it once, you can do it again.
I think the negative side is the misinformation that spreads. And although I was talking to a young woman last week who said that she wasn't vaccinated yet. She wasn't anti-vax, so she recommended her parents and grandparents be vaccinated, but she was concerned about the fertility problems. There aren't any fertility problems.
There aren't any.
It's just absolutely recommended that pregnant women should get vaccinated. More news on that today, because pregnant women are much more at risk. But women should be getting vaccinated before they get pregnant, and it doesn't affect their ability to then get pregnant. And there's no impact of the vaccine on the outcome of the pregnancy. That's been demonstrated many times over. But yet, still somebody, intelligent person capable of holding a conversation about it, saying, oh, well, they're saying that women of childbearing age shouldn't have it.
But they're not. I mean, who's saying that? Uncle Bob is saying that. It's like nobody with any expertise or experience or qualifications in the field is saying that.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. What can you do to...
So, that
what can anybody
surprises
do
me.
to change a person's mind? You can't. You actually probably can't. And that surprises us because we're scientists and we don't think in that same way.
So it seems strange that somebody would be so isolated from the facts, which are coming from many different sources. It's not just one manufacturer of one vaccine saying, oh, it's fine, it's safe. There are so many different sources of information about this now and how it's really vital to get pregnant women vaccinated, and there's no reason not to vaccinate all young women. And yet she's still in this mindset of, oh, no, well, I'll wait until we know more about it. Well, what more are we going to know? We know it.
And do you think this sort of thing's combatable? There's a question here where someone has asked, do you think the vaccine should have been compulsory? I mean, is there a point where you just accept we are where we are and this is, these myths can't be dealt with, so we just have to power on through with this and make people have it if they want to be healthcare workers, if they want to be in care homes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really helpful to make vaccines compulsory for the whole population, because that just actually turns some people off even more. But there are people who work in care homes. I think it's right that you're going to have to be vaccinated, because the people you're working with are so much at risk, and we have so much evidence that the people in care homes are really at risk of getting infected with this virus. So we can't be knowingly putting them in a situation where somebody who's caring for them may be infected and may transmit the vaccination to them. Generally, I think no, but there are certain circumstances where you have to think about the wider society.
Yeah.
There's a question here which I think, I've never completely got my handle on it, and I think it's really interesting. How many people are involved in this? How many people were involved in Oxford in January and February and March? How many people are now involved in AstraZeneca in April, May, June? What is the size of the enterprise that got this vaccine to where it is now?
Well, I don't think anybody could give you a definite answer,
In
because we've been doing our own bit.
In Oxford, we've been sending more than 200 in Oxford alone, covering the trials team, the manufacturing team, the scale-up team, the immunology teams, the testing teams. And then each of those 25 sites around the UK will have between, 10, 20 people in them, probably. And then, obviously, all our manufacturing partners. So now we're manufacturing at Oxford BioMedica, and that will be 100 people probably, because they're full scale, they're churning out however many million a month. And then other manufacturing sites, AstraZeneca. There's a lot of divisions at AstraZeneca doing a lot of things. I mean, hundreds of people at AstraZeneca have had direct input in this project. And now we're manufacturing, what, 25 different sites. So in South Korea, in India, in Australia,
China.
Yeah, so all of that feeds in. And then, of course, our huge network of participants and of volunteers who move the participants around, because the trials are still running. We're still getting data. So, yeah, thousands of people. Tens of thousands of people if you count the volunteers and the participants.
And do you ever stop to sort of think of the magnitude of it, that people now talk about, oh, I had an AstraZeneca, or I had a Pfizer, or I had a Moderna, that you're sort of...
You could get a badge, couldn't you? Team Moderna.
Yeah.
But, I mean,
somebody gave me a tote bag that said Vaccinated AF, which we won't say what it stands for, but it's... It's weird. The magnitude's weird. The impact on everybody's lives is weird for us.
And this is what we've been gearing up to do for a long time, and all of a sudden it's happened and it's worked.
But the numbers are enormous. So the Public Health England numbers, so this is numbers just for England, and the last time I checked would have been probably mid-September, and they're estimates, but it's something like 130,000 lives saved in England alone by the vaccination rollout, so by the NHS efforts to get ours and Pfizer's and Moderna's vaccines out to the population. 130, grandmas, people our age and above who are still with their families today. We don't know their names, but they're here with us because of that rollout programme. I mean, that's a big number. That's the city of Oxford are still here with us because of that. That's kind of humbling to think you've played even a little part in that story.
so are you now just going to retire? You can't talk this. It's GQ awards and parties.
Man of the Year.
Yeah.
Seriously, you should have seen the number of emails that Sarah's sent already today before we've even got here. There is no retiring for this woman.
There's a lot more to do. Trying to go back to the projects we were working on earlier, they're not finished. There's more students to train. There's just a lot more to do.
Yeah, and Kath, you're back teaching.
Yeah, well, Oxford University academic term, it's week 1 this week, so we've got undergraduates and we've got postgrads, and I've been teaching genomics this morning, and then we've got to make this vaccine against Nipah that Sarah's still not got the money for, but we're going to try. And then Ebola, there's a plague trial about to start. It keeps us busy. But, I mean, this is nice, but we're not here to do this bit. We are here to do the science. We are here to use the knowledge that we have to make the world just a little bit better. And, don't forget, before COVID, there was malaria, there was Nipah, there was Lassa. They're all still with us. Still a load more that we can hopefully help with.
And do you think we're in a better position? If you think of the Second World War, out of that came all sorts of technologies, and we've kind of had this level of funding, and you've got your platform as the mRNA. I think your platform is also being looked at for cancer vaccines, which is a completely different concept.
Yeah.
What do you think the next 10 years are going to bring as a consequence of the pandemic?
Well, there's a lot that we've learned and more that we want to do. And unfortunately, it does come back to money again, because we need some investment into this to make the next stage happen. And there's going to be a lot of demands on money, obviously, post-pandemic, because everybody's now short of cash and decisions have to be made about where to spend it. But I think there's so much more we can do to prevent this ever happening again, which is really important. So we need to try to get this work moving and apply the gains that we learnt about.
Yeah, we need to improve manufacturing globally. We need to think about supply chains. We need to think about mechanisms for equitable access, because I think that is one of the places that we perhaps haven't done as well as we could have, in terms of, okay, we can make these vaccines, but how do we get them to the places where they need to be? We want to be able to develop the technology better. Even during the pandemic, we made the process for manufacturing our vaccine better. mRNA vaccines have been a game changer. Let's be really clear, that has the potential to revolutionise vaccinology, but a lot of that is covered by patents and IP, so we don't always have the flexibility to do creative academic tests with some of that. There's all kinds of things we should learn, but, you know, we all see it, don't we, at the moment, that there is this tendency to just go back to life as it was before. So our fundings will go back to doing it the old-fashioned way. Our regulatory applications will go back to doing it the way that we did it before. Travelling around the world to have 2-hour meetings will go back to getting on planes again. I don't know. I think I'm worried about us as a community and as a species that we've done an elastic stretch and we're just going back to the previous state because it was easy and it felt kind of comfortable, and maybe this would be a blip and not been used as a disruption from which we can grow. I'm not the right person to do that, but I do think that we do seem to have this tendency to be snapping back as opposed to reverting to a new state. That must come up a lot of these kind of ideas sharing sessions now.
Well, on that, so you managed to get this vaccine made in sort of 9 months or something like that. And I remember chatting in February, and you said, well, we think we can do this within a year, which was, it felt simultaneously amazing, because nothing like this had been done. And I think I said sort of extremely naively, well, but it'll all be over by then, what's the point? Could we feasibly have done it even faster? If this popped up tomorrow, could you say, actually, you know what, we can do this in 5 months, we can do this in 4 months, we can...
There are things that we learned that we could do faster. I mean, but the big thing where we were waiting and waiting is because of the virus moving around the whole world and peaks in infections at different times in different parts of the world. We had trials in different countries because we need to know how the vaccine works in different populations. But people kept saying, oh, why don't you move and set up a trial site here because there's lots of cases there. Well, by the time we got the trial set up there, because of all the hoops you have to jump through, the number of cases would have dropped there because they'd have gone into lockdown. So thinking regulatory harmonisation is a really big topic, but when you have to apply for different approvals for different parts of the world to do the trials and then to use the vaccine, that actually just slows everything down. So regulatory harmonisation is one big thing that would make a difference to our ability to work globally and be quicker next time.
Yeah, it's not that easy because there was always going to be a delay between you trialling something and then you getting the answers to the trial and then you be able to deploy it. So as long as the system still requires that you prove that it works before you use it in a lot of people, which that doesn't have to be the system, but I mean, it is the system as we have it at the moment. It's hard to imagine what the other system would be, but I mean, systems can change. There is always going to be some kind of lag between us. We're going to have to test if it works, and then once we know it works, we can use it. Because that just takes time.
Could that change? So at the moment, we don't do that with a tweaked flu vaccine. Could we view a tweaked adenovirus vaccine or a tweaked mRNA vaccine as actually just a new version of...
Yeah, this was the vision for a platform, yeah? Don't worry about the fact it's a new disease. Yeah. Just go for it straight away.
Well, if it's another coronavirus, you might be able to do that. The thing is, because we don't have any vaccines, we didn't have any vaccines against human coronavirus, we don't know what we're trying to achieve in terms of immune responses with any of the new vaccines to get protection. Now we have a better idea. It's still not entirely clear. You can't nail it down precisely, but we've got a much better idea what the vaccine needs to do to protect people against a coronavirus infection. So if there was another coronavirus that arose next year, we might be able to go more quickly because we do what's called immunobridging, where you say, oh yes, this new vaccine's giving us the same level and same type of immune response against the new disease than we got with the old vaccine and the old disease. That's therefore very likely to be protective. Because with flu, it's flu every year, it's just a different strain. Yeah. So you need to show that the new vaccine induces antibodies against a new strain in people, and then you go and use it.
Good. Well, on the thought that there might be a new coronavirus next year, that's probably as good a time as any to bring things to a joyful end, because at least we'll be able to possibly deal with it sooner. One last question for both of you. In sort of 10 years' time, when you look back on this period, how are you going to remember it?
I don't think I will, because I can't really remember much of last year at all.
All of a blur. Yeah, well, it's okay because we wrote the book, so you'll be able to read the book. Oh, that's what I was doing. No, what it was a mission. This is what we remember. It was a mission. It's the absolute, all of the focus on the one thing to the exclusion of all others. You can get a lot done when you're in mission mode, but of course it is at the exclusion of all other things. So I think we'll remember it as the year of the mission, won't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, their book's great fun. They're going to be signing it straight afterwards in the bookshop. Thank you all for coming along, and thank you very much.
Like flowers cultivate in cracks in the concrete, culture grows in the spaces between the everyday. It's there in darkened rooms when the stage lights come on. It's in a park full of people belting out the same song. It happens in classrooms, having a go, hands-on. It's found in small circles, exchanging stories. It's under a tent, making brand new discoveries. It's in those shared experiences that help build communities. It inspires change, provides opportunities. It brings joy, sparks curiosity. It provokes feelings recognisable to everyone, making our hearts race and giving us goosebumps. It's for those who don't think they can have it. It's for those who know that they need it. It fosters connection and understanding. It is ours for the taking, as well as the sharing. Culture is what makes us human. It makes our world better. Culture is our culture. Let's explore it together.
That being a writer was something that I could be, because, I'll let you into a secret, my handwriting was terrible.
I really wanted to meet her. When I heard about it, I just couldn't believe it. It encouraged me to write more and follow my dreams.
To have this here, we've been reading a class text for the last 5 weeks. They are engrossed in it, and to be able to meet the author is just, they're starstruck. It's amazing.
I think it's so important. It's such a nice environment for them to actually enjoy reading and to encourage their imagination.
So when we tell a story, we keep it alive. When you say it's all right for you, you're happy. I'm so lucky. I'm so unlucky.
The winner of the 2021 Clipper is the absolutely brilliant On the Move by Michael Rosen, illustrated by Quentin Blake.
Don't veg, don't hook, don't grips, don't fots. Take the bagels out of your socks. These letters on here, CLPE, the Centre for Literacy and Primary Education. Remember it, really everybody remember it. They have done more than anything to keep poetry alive.
I'm very excited, truly humbled to be here at the Cheltenham Literature Festival. It's actually a dream come true for me, so very excited. The secret to life for sure is a little wiggle and a little cha-cha-cha and a little paso doble or even a samba around the kitchen. I would like to think that Strictly will last forever and ever and ever. It's exciting, it's full of fun, and every year something different happens. It's nice to meet you.
You don't often, as an academic researcher, get to have the real-world consequences of the work that you do with your colleagues in your arm, but both Sarah and I have AstraZeneca in our arms.
I was confident we would have a vaccine. The question was, how effective would it be?
Thank you very much.
This is for us a short-lived thing. We have a story to tell, and then we will get back to the lab and carry on making vaccines against all the other things out there that you want to be protected
this is all part
against.
of making science more accessible to people, which is something that we think we need to do more of.
The essence of the book is now we have to change the perception of the average black person, the average woman, the average gay person. And then, not to say that after that's done, that they still won't be exploited or discriminated against, but they won't be exploited or discriminated against because they're black, because they're women, because they're gay.
Hello to Cheltenham Festival. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there with you guys, but you know what? I'm coming to you from the wall, 7th highest mountain, Dalagri. I think as a mountaineer, There's no better way to present myself from this beautiful place.